Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Roman Serbyn. He is a Professor Emeritus of Russian and East European History at l'Université de Québec à Montréal and an expert on Ukraine. And the presentation topic today is How Ukraine Relates to Russia, a Look at History. Born in Ukraine, Professor Serbyn and his family escaped from Germany after World War II and eventually arrived in Canada where other family members lived. Following high school, he attended McGill University, where he later obtained a PhD, and in the interim pursued graduate studies in France. Professor Serbyn was on the faculty at Collège Sainte-Marie, and eventually he was invited to join the faculty of UQAM when it was established. He's been retired for a number of years, but retains a keen interest in history and current events. Welcome, Professor Serbyn. We are very, very happy to have you here. A very timely topic. So the screen is yours, as they say.
Good morning, or good afternoon, actually. It's starting afternoon. It's a great pleasure, and I'm really moved to be invited to this organization that I've heard so much about, and I know is doing such an excellent job. I'd like to thank the people involved. I'd like to thank the president. You will excuse me if I don't pronounce the names correctly. Susan Buscemi, and of course, Colonel Glenn Shepard for, well, first of all, bringing me here today. I thought it would be more appropriate for me to speak here at the directly. Actually, it would have been much more pleasant for me if we didn't have this pandemic and I had been able to meet with you directly in your premises and meet every one of you. So once again, thank you very much. I called my little presentation, about 25 minutes, Ukraine, Unraveling Putin's Genocidal War Against Ukraine. This may sound a bit party-pree, but it's very difficult not to be party-pree against the war with all the atrocities going on. We can see every day, we have a front seat by the window and we watch this every day. Any newspaper you pick up in Montreal or anywhere else in the Western world will be talking about this war. So I will not be discussing the war itself so much because first of all the information is there and anybody who is interested in it has been following it. And secondly, there's still very much that is not known for sure. As a historian, I used to say jokingly to my students and to my colleagues that from among the apostles, the Apostle Thomas was the one that was closest to me. And you know why? I need proof. I need proof. We have been seeing things really on the one side, in one hand, very horrible. On the other hand, quite amazing. And that's why it is much more difficult to analyze. We have seen the invading armies being resisted for such a long time. It was a surprise to everybody. It was a surprise to Putin, to his military commanders and so on, who expected to do whatever they set out to do much more quickly in several days. And yet the resistance that they met was something that was surprised everybody in Ukraine, in Russia, and in the West. And Ukraine, since 24th of February, when the invasion started, is still continuing to resist. This is what, about 40 days now? That's a very long time for a smaller country, although Ukraine is not a small country compared to other countries in Europe, but a small country compared to Russia. Russia, not only by its physical size, but by the population, is about 150 more or less, and Ukraine is only about 40 million. So the two sides are not very comparable. So this also, there are other very surprising facts that have come out. Not only do we see armies, the Russian army, or members in the Russian army not behaving as soldiers are expected to behave, the atrocities committed, but also what is surprising is the position taken by so many people in Russia, although they have access to mass media now. And very surprising is also the pronouncements of the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. He is against the war, but he is not criticizing or opposing the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What I want to do is to address two questions. First, why did Putin invade Ukraine? What were his motives, his goals? And the second question, which is also now being raised internationally, is Putin perpetrating a genocide against the Ukrainians? I think these two questions can be analyzed without having yet the conclusion of this conflict and without having exact and proven all details of the accusations. So first, why did Putin invade Ukraine? What were his motives and goals? A good source of information can be gathered from Putin's own declarations if one learns to interpret his Orwellian, what I call Putin speak. When Putin called the breakup of the Soviet Empire a catastrophe, what he meant was that he would like to put it back together. When he said that there is no Ukrainian nation, obviously he knew much better. What he really meant was that there must not be a distinct Ukrainian nation. When he said that Lenin created the Ukrainian state, and mind you, Lenin was the one that helped destroy the empire, which is now sort of given a positive appreciation by Putin. So when he said that Lenin created the Ukrainian state, then the Ukrainian state is an artificial creation by a communist leader, and obviously it could not exist in its own right. And what happened after the breakup of the Soviet Union was that it has become a puppet of the United States of the West. Now, to understand Putin's reasoning, we have to know something about Putin himself. Putin, who was born in 1952, which is the end of the Stalin era, or the era when Stalin was still alive, who died a year later. Putin is actually going back to the Stalin era and imitating Stalinist tradition of state building. And this is very important, I think. It's a question of state building. Both Lenin, Stalin, and now Putin have to be seen as state builders. We usually accept this term in a very positive way. State building is something positive. Well, it depends what kind of state they're building. And Lenin was building a state that was supposed to continue the socialist revolution that Lenin undertook in Russia. Now, this was very difficult because the revolution was not really according to the Marxist plan, to the Marxist schema. It was not really a proletarian revolution or a workers' revolution, because there was very little proletariat and workers in the Russian Empire. It was a revolution, or rather a putsch, organized according to Blanqui, the French philosopher or French tactician, and also to Tkachov, who had the same idea. You organize a small group, you seize power, and then you introduce socialism from the top down. And this is what Lenin did. Well, of course, Lenin did have the help of workers, because after all, this was an ideology that could win the working class over, or at least a part of it. But the workers, as I said, was a small group. So most of the population of the Russian Empire was actually made up of what you would call peasants or agricultural workers. Now, Lenin and the Bolsheviks could get the support of the workers, as I said, but they had to give something to the other two groups that were very important. That is, as I mentioned, the peasants. And there's also a question of nationalities, of national minorities in the Russian Empire, which had been suppressed by the Tsarist regime. In other words, Lenin had to win these two people over. And the concessions that he did, well, first of all, he confiscated all the big landowners' properties and distributed the land to the peasants. And then he introduced the federalism for organizing the state among of these population in the Russian, post-Russian Empire. In this way, he did get more support, and he was able to conquer Ukraine and others, and to put a big part of the Russian Empire back together. Stalin, who inherited the power after fighting against his opponents, Trotsky and other, realized that he could go along with this because the unity of the empire would be held together by the party. So Stalin used the party and continued to use that. And the only problem was that the concessions to the nationalities, which in the 20s was also not only organizing republics, but also recognizing the languages and so on. This created a new revival of national groups in the Soviet Union and in the Republic. Stalin, by the end of the 20s and beginning of the 30s, started a new policy, and that was of trying to reformulate the Soviet Union. You could still keep the name. After all, the United States is called, each a unit is called a state, but it's not really a state. It's more similar like the provinces in Canada. So in the same way, the union republics were not real union republics because the government were actually subordinated to the party, and the party was strictly organized from the top down, from the Kremlin down to the villages. So this is but Stalin realized that empires were tricky organizations, and history has shown that empires tended to fall apart, especially when the power, and in this case, the Communist Party, becomes weak. And Stalin was right. This is what happened in the end of the 1980s and 1991. The Soviet Union fell apart. And Stalin was in this way right to try to change this state into one solid country, centralized and with a homogenized, ethnically homogenized population. In other words, this meant Russification, and the Russification did start under Stalin. Now, Putin, as I said, inherited this. Putin was brought up in the tradition, the Russian Soviet communist tradition, and he was a KGB. His interest was to be part of the power structure of the state. Now, there's a saying from the Soviet period in Russia which says that there's no former KGB. In other words, once you're a KGB, you're a KGB for life. You are marked for life, and Putin admitted so much. So, as a successor to the centralized power exercised by Stalin and his immediate successors, Putin wanted to bring back all the lost republics after the breakup of 1991, and also homogenize the population into Russians. And this is what he has been trying to do. So this, in my opinion, was the main goal of Putin's war against Ukrainians. And this war started already in 2014 with the invasion by was called the Little Green Men of Crimea. Ukraine was completely unprepared for this because of the president it had, who was opposed to Ukrainian course towards joining Europe, NATO, and so on, Yanukovych. Eventually, there was a Orange Revolution called Orange Revolution in Ukraine, which toppled Yanukovych. Yanukovych fled, but in his short period of power, he had undermined the military capabilities of Ukraine and so on. And so when Crimea was invaded, Ukraine did not react in a way that would prevent Crimea being annexed by Russia. The annexation was done in two stages. First, Crimea was declared an independent republic. It had a referendum for independence, and then it asked to be to join Russia, and in this way, actually, it was annexed by Russia. Similarly, in that same year, another conflict started in the Donbass. The Donbass region was heavily Russified in two ways. In other words, there were ethnic Russians who had settled there as workers and so on. But there were also a part of the Ukrainian population which had been Russified. In other words, because of the presence of the Russians in the administration and so on, Ukrainians, the Russian language became predominant, and it was easy to organize pro-Russian in that region in Donbass. And this is where we got the idea of Ukrainian or the pro-Russian separatists. And these so-called separatists, apparently, or according to the Russian way of presenting it, staged opposition struggle, military struggle against the government in Kyiv. Actually, what happened is that there were no separatists in Donbass, because a separatist, as we in Quebec and Canada know very well, and other countries as well, separatists are people who want a separate state. That's where separatists come from. State. They are independentists. They want a separate state. Ukrainians were separatists after the breakdown of the Tsarist Empire, because they wanted an independent, a separate state. These people were not. What some of them wanted, what many of them wanted, was to be annexed to Russia. The proper term is annexationists. These were for annexation. And we in Canada also know. They were annexationists in Quebec. They were annexationists. This back in the 19th century. And we know that the question of annexation to the United States, and in a joking way, the annexation of the United States to Canada were topics that were discussed in our own lifetime. So this is where confusion comes in, because improper or misleading terminology. And we can still read. Today, I read in the newspaper and the Gazette, where still the term separatist is mentioned. Well, you cannot conceptualize properly if you don't use proper terms in the proper sense. So these annexationists were, as I said, were helped by Russians who were sent into to Donbass with arms, and they actually created that part of the war. So the war of invasion of Ukraine under Putin begins, as I said, in 2014, and not just now today. It's just the continuation. And I thought that this would be the type of war that Putin would continue. In other words, he would try to join Donbass or Donetsk and Luhansk, so-called republics, to the Crimea Republic by occupying the coastline of this Azov and so on, to join these regions together and so on. In other words, he would continue his annexation of Ukraine piece by piece. I was mistaken. And as we're most of the people, I think, who were watching these things, because very few actually expected until the very last days that Putin would start an all-out war against all of Ukraine, because now Ukraine is being attacked from all sides, east, north, through Belarus, and south from Crimea. Okay, now let us consider the second part. The second question: is Putin perpetrating a genocide against Ukrainians? I think that the answer must be yes, it is, and has been mentioned by newspaper people, commentators, and politicians, because he wants to destroy Ukraine, as I showed in the beginning, as an independent state. Ukraine should not exist, and he's trying to destroy it. And also, Ukrainians are not Ukrainians, they're just little Russians, and together with white Russians and great Russians, they are part of the Russian people, and this is what it should be, and so on. Putin has, in this way, also rehabilitated to a large extent the Russian Tsarist history, and he has appropriated for himself, or rather for Russia, the beginning of East Slavic history, that is the history of Kievan Rus, with the center in Kiev. And Moscow didn't even exist at that time, when the Kievan Rus was organized as a big state. And so Moscow only appeared, the city of Moscow appeared much later, and so did the Principality of the State of Muscovy. Now, all this Putin is trying to destroy. How do you destroy? Well, first of all, how do you consider that is a genocide? Well, genocide has to be understood in the sense that it was defined, the term was defined by the United Nations Convention. And let me just briefly recall this United Nations Convention of 48, which says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts with the intent to destroy. The word destroy is extremely important. It doesn't say with the intent to kill, but to destroy. And destroying can be killing physically and by destroying by other means. In whole or in part, a national, and then it describes four groups, or mentions four groups: national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And then it gives the 5 ways. And if you analyze the 5 ways, you see that 2.5 are physical killing, and 2.5 could be other ways. Let me give an example. The first one, A, killing members of a group. Well, that's straightforward. You kill, and that's it. But the fifth one, forcibly transferring children of the group, in other words, of the group that is being attacked, to another group, in other words, the group that is attacking. Now, how do you do that? Well, one way is to transferring these children to another group, but it can be also done by other ways. It could be done by schools. Now, if you take children, Ukrainian children, and you force them to go to Russian schools, because there are no other schools in Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea, then you gradually transform these children into Russian. And I want to illustrate this with an alphabet book that was presented that was written for children. And I'll give you 2 just two example of two letters. R, here's R, the letter R, and you see the church here, the Russian church from Russia somewhere, and there's a little text, and it says this R. I have the translation into French, but I'm sure that everybody understands French. Am I right? Yes.
Pretty close.
Okay. C'est notre patrie, la Russie. Rivière et steppe, forêt et champs, il n'y a pas de plus bel état sur la planète. Prenons-en soin ensemble, les amis. And then there's another letter, very interesting letter. It's Ya, and it's written like the capital R in the Latin alphabet. And Ya means is the first letter of Yazik. Yazik is langue in French, langue in the two senses. And here is the little text for the language. Langue, et nous parlons avec. Parlons, crions, chantons. Répondons en classe. Lisons les livres et des poèmes. Le russe, notre langue, la joie. Et nous n'avons pas besoin d'un autre. Not only is this patriotism, Russian patriotism now, it is chauvinistic. Nous n'avons pas besoin d'autre. So this is one way of transferring, and this is part of genocide. And this is what is happening in Ukraine, and this fits completely with what Putin has been saying, that there is no Ukrainian language. There's just a Russian language. Ukrainian is just a dialect of the Russian language. So I think that I will end my small presentation here. If there are any questions or other ideas and that you would like to discuss or controversy, if there's any, as I used to tell my students, if I make a mistake, please bring it to my attention and show me where I am wrong. And if I see that I am wrong, I will thank you, because I will have learned something more, and you will just have enriched my knowledge. So, and I had a very good reaction with my students with this kind of attitude. And I would like to share these ideas with you and hear your ideas as well. Thank you very much.